Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We are just waiting for participants to join, and we will start in just 1 minute. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I think we'll begin. We have a short event, so we'll not take up too much more time waiting. Today is the beginning of HLPF in New York, and we want to welcome you to the side event, Building Better Responses to Organized Crime and SDG 16. We have a very distinguished panel today, and we will begin with remarks by their excellencies from the permanent missions of Japan, Austria, and Colombia. My name is Summer Walker, and I'm the head of Security and Rights Initiatives at the Global Initiative Against Organized Crime. And we are very happy to host this event today with Colombia, Japan, and Austria, with UNDP, and with the University for Peace. This year's HLPF will address SDG 16, promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. Not only is there a concrete target to significantly reduce and combat organized crime, arms, and illicit financial flows directly, but nearly all of the targets in this SDG require combating organized crime and the harms it causes for peaceful societies. Also this year, the General Assembly has newly designated an International Day for the prevention of and the fight against all forms of transnational organized crime. And last December, the Security Council held an open debate on the issue. So today we're going to hear from our speakers about the strategies they employ to address organized crime's impacts on development. And I will first turn to our panel for welcome remarks. I'll start today with Ambassador Yamanaka, who's the Deputy Permanent Representative from the Permanent Mission of Japan to the UN. Ambassador Yamanaka was previously the Deputy Director General for the International Trade Policy at the Trade Policy Bureau of the Foreign Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry. And he's had a distinguished career at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and at embassies around the world. Ambassador, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for the kind the introduction. And I'd like to start by thanking Mr. Shaw and other colleagues of the Global Initiative for organizing this important event and their tireless efforts against organized crime. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to deliver welcome remarks alongside Ambassador Lenore Zarabata and Ms. Julia Ebert. Today, against a backdrop of technological innovation, traditional organized crime has expanded its sphere of activity, threatening people around the world, including the most vulnerable, as well as posing an obstacle to the SDGs. Under these circumstances, Japan would like to reiterate the importance of the rule of law, which is a prerequisite for sustainable development, as well as maintenance of peace and security, both at national and international levels. In addition, Japan believes that a holistic approach focusing on the dignity of each person is indispensable to overcoming this situation, and that the human security, which seeks to protect and empower individuals, especially those in vulnerable situations, with a respect for the dignity of them, can be a catalyst. In these circumstances, Japan has long supported the fight against organized crime, and its co-sponsoring today's event, which reinforces HLPF's attention to SDG 16 and organized crime. Japan has been working closely with the UNODC to strengthen law enforcement capacity, including through capacity building in developing countries. Last May, Japan and the UNODC signed a $6 million US dollars funding agreement to address maritime crime in the Pacific region, which helps strengthen capacity of maritime law enforcement and criminal justice institutions to address maritime crime, including crimes in the fisheries sector and human and drug trafficking. Under the project, inshore patrol crafts have been delivered to maritime police in the region, and the coastal radar stations have also been installed on land to improve maritime surveillance capability. This February, Japan also invited the judges from South and Southeastern countries to participate in a training course on handling terrorism trials. The purpose of this workshop was to improve technical capabilities, including the use of electronic evidence in the investigation and the prosecution of terrorism cases, promote criminal and judicial cooperation, build capacity for prosecution in general, and improve understanding of the protection of human rights during prosecution. These initiatives demonstrate Japan is committed to continuing to promote the rule of law in Asia, the Indo-Pacific region, and beyond. In addition, Japan co-sponsored the General Assembly Resolution, International Day for the Prevention and the Fight Against All Forms of Transnational Organized Crime, adopted this March, with like-minded countries, including Colombia and Australia. This resolution aims to contribute to raising awareness of the threat posed by all forms of organized crime and to strengthening international cooperation. Furthermore, Japan is actively involved in the discussion of other multilateral frameworks such as the G20 and the Global Coalition Against Synthetic Drug Threats, a further testament of Japan attaching importance to addressing international organized crime, including corruption and drugs. In conclusion, Japan is determined to work together with the international community to address the issue of transnational organized crime and will do its utmost to promote international cooperation to empower those under vulnerable situations, adhering to the key principle of the SDGs, leaving no one behind. I hope this side event will enhance your discussions on organized crime, focusing on its effects on sustainable development, and that participants will learn from governments, UN agencies, and the civil society organizations about their strategies to counter organized crime's impact and support the SDGs. I thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. It's really great to hear of your commitment to combating these issues. I will now turn to Ambassador Zalabata, who is the permanent representative of Colombia to the UN. Ambassador Zalabata is the first indigenous woman appointed as her country's ambassador to the UN. Prior to her appointment, she's been an advocate for the rights of indigenous peoples in Colombia and environmental justice, and has worked to improve the political representation of indigenous women and peoples. Over to you, Ambassador. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias. Quiero comenzar extendiendo un saludo a mis colegas de las misiones permanentes de Japón y Austria, así como a los panelistas que hoy nos acompañan desde las diferentes organizaciones y agencias de Naciones Unidas, y un especial agradecimiento a los organizadores de este evento, la Iniciativa Global contra la Delincuencia Organizada Transnacional, el PNUD y la Universidad para la Paz. Para mí es un honor dar apertura a esta importante conversación sobre el impacto de la delincuencia organizada transnacional en el desarrollo y en la implementación exitosa de la Agenda 2030 y los ODS. Sin duda, promover una sociedad pacífica e inclusiva, facilitar el acceso a la justicia para toda la población y crear instituciones eficaces, responsables e inclusivas a todos los niveles, es una parte fundamental de la receta al éxito de una agenda de desarrollo coherente y acorde con las realidades de nuestros países. Esto incluye la consolidación de una justicia social y ambiental indispensable para cumplir las metas del ODS 16 y deben marcar la hoja de ruta de los procesos de paz. Colombia tiene el firme compromiso con la implementación del ODS 16 a través de los esfuerzos del gobierno del cambio del presidente Gustavo Petro, materializados en nuestra política de paz total, y la interrelación que tiene esta con los demás pilares del Plan Nacional de Desarrollo. Asimismo, reafirmamos la importancia de los ejercicios de seguimiento y evaluación como los reportes nacionales y voluntarios para tomar acciones concretas encaminadas a corregir el rumbo y acelerar la Agenda 2030. Este año Colombia presentará en el marco del Foro Político de Alto Nivel 2024 su cuarto reporte nacional voluntario. Y en dicha labor hemos integrado la revisión del ODS 16 de manera transversal, destacando en particular la importante relación que tienen todos los ODS en general para cumplir las metas trazadas para cumplir el ODS 16. Y como este igualmente es fundamental para generar las condiciones idóneas para garantizar las transformaciones sociales que la Agenda 2030 requiere con urgencia. Ahora, quisiera referirme específicamente a la relación de la delincuencia organizada transnacional con el desarrollo y la plena implementación de los ODS y la Agenda 2030 con 3 puntos centrales. Primero, Colombia considera que para atender de forma integral los desafíos de la sociedad contemporánea, incluida la prevención de la delincuencia organizada transnacional, es importante incorporar un enfoque de seguridad humana que tenga como propósito principal la protección de la vida. Esta visión comprende trascender de una visión de seguridad concebida desde el tema militar y la mera ausencia de guerra, y proponer avanzar hacia la superación de causas estructurales que han permitido la persistencia del conflicto y el crimen en los territorios, la necesidad de evitar la violencia en la cotidianidad de las poblaciones, la reconstrucción del tejido social en armonía con el contexto socioambiental y el respeto por la vida. Segundo, consideramos que es necesario fomentar la lucha contra la delincuencia organizada transnacional como forma de lograr la estabilidad en los territorios y así consolidar la paz en los mismos. Y para ello, Colombia le apuesta a la formulación y aplicación de una política criminal bajo un enfoque de derechos humanos y justicia restaurativa que promueva la garantía de la dignidad humana, la resocialización efectiva, la inclusión social y la recomposición de los lazos sociales afectados por la comisión del delito. Reducir la reincidencia es uno de nuestros principales objetivos de las intervenciones de la justicia penal, porque se traduce en mayor seguridad para la comunidad y una menor presión y costos para el sistema de justicia penal. Aún más, Colombia reconoce la necesidad de transformar la política criminal penitenciaria del país, priorizar la aplicación de la justicia restaurativa y la alternatividad penal frente al enfoque punitivo, fortalecer la atención penitenciaria para mitigar los riesgos de reincidencia, articular la labor y la oferta institucional para la inclusión social de las personas pospenadas y mitigar los riesgos de vinculación al delito por parte de adolescentes y jóvenes. Tercero, si queremos construir mejores respuestas, es necesario reconocer la importancia de avanzar en metodologías de identificación, documentación y caracterización del amplio espectro de fenómenos macrocriminales, lo cual permite promover y desarrollar la articulación y la cooperación internacional para la lucha contra la delincuencia organizada transnacional en términos de intercambio de información, buenas prácticas y acciones conjuntas para el desmantelamiento de redes criminales transnacionales, con énfasis en los nodos y líderes del sistema criminal. Estamos absolutamente convencidos que solo a través de la efectiva cooperación es posible llegar a cumplir estas metas. Cierro resaltando que es necesario orientar nuestros esfuerzos en lograr un acceso efectivo a la justicia para todas las personas, porque creemos firmemente que es fundamental para alcanzar el bienestar, la dignidad y goce efectivo de los derechos sin ninguna discriminación. Colombia trabaja en una estrategia de desarrollo de capacidades institucionales, técnicas y tecnológicas del sistema de justicia que le permita funcionar como un ecosistema institucional integrado, descentralizado y enfocado en la dignidad de las personas, las comunidades y los territorios. Es en las personas en donde debemos centrarnos y para ello el intercambio de experiencia con países que han empezado este camino y tienen resultados positivos es muy importante, muy importante. Gracias nuevamente por la invitación y a quienes nos acompañan. Gracias por su interés en esta conversación. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I think you've really drawn linkages between Yes, thank you. You've really drawn links between really critical areas, which range from development, the criminal justice system, and the international cooperation angle of what's needed in building better responses. So I really appreciate that today. We'll now turn to Julia Erberl, who is the first Secretary for Human Rights from the Permanent Mission of Austria to the UN. Julia was previously posted at the Permanent Mission of Austria in Vienna and responsible for matters related to the CND, CCPCJ, the UNTOC, and the UNCAC. Mrs. Erberl has worked at the Austrian Embassy in Addis Ababa and the Departments for European Foreign and Security Policy and Disarmament and Non-Proliferation at the Foreign Ministry in Vienna as well. So over to you, Julia.
Thank you very much, Summer. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure for us to welcome you to this important event on the impact of organized crime on SDG 16. And we're honored to co-sponsor the event today together with our partners from Colombia and Japan, with whom together we were part of a core group under the leadership of Italy, co-initiating the International Day for the Prevention and Fight Against All Forms of Transnational Organized Crime. And for the first time, this day will be commemorated in November 2024. Something to look forward to. We also want to particularly thank the organizers, the Global Initiative, and commend your essential work in the fight against transnational organized crime. Your office in Vienna is an important hub and partner for Austria. Ladies and gentlemen, SDG 16 figures among the goals where we find ourselves furthest away from our aspirations for 2030. Even though the promotion of peaceful, inclusive societies, justice, and inclusive institutions is a critical prerequisite for sustainable development, organized crime is a serious obstacle in this regard. Not only can it pose a grave threat to a country's internal stability, whether through excessive violence, human trafficking, attacks on human rights defenders, or corruption, but it can also seriously deter foreign direct investment or mutually beneficial trade. Disadvantaged youth often have no choice but to join these organizations, leave their country, further impeding economic growth and prosperity and creating a vicious cycle of poverty and instability that can be difficult to escape. Let me give you one example in particular. An estimated $2.6 trillion, more than 5% of the global GDP, are lost to corruption annually around the world. Only a fraction of this amount could present a significant push for the 2030 agenda. As a coordinator of the group of Friends of the Rule of Law, Austria will therefore continue to give high priority to the promotion of good governance and the fight against corruption. The fight against organized crime not only promotes sustainable development, but also goes to the heart of the UN's mandate to promote and maintain international peace and security. Organized crime can disrupt interstate relations through, for example, human trafficking, the smuggling of drugs, firearms, or migratory flows. with serious consequences, not only for the country where organized crime originates, but also for regional stability. With Vienna as a center for international, regional, and non-governmental organizations working on these issues, such as UNODC or the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, as well as the Global Initiative, Austria recognizes its special role in combating transnational organized crime. To show our support, we regularly contribute to projects by UNODC aimed to prevent and fight transnational organized crime, especially related to trafficking in persons, smuggling of migrants, or cybercrime. Moreover, we strongly engage in the cooperation with partners from the European Union and participate in focus actions of Europol, most recently during the Joint Action Days in November 2023 to fight organized crime in Southeast Europe. However, there's still a long way to go, and we need to create and maintain mechanisms which ensure accountability and fight impunity for organized crime. Undoubtedly, greater efforts on our part are required. More intergovernmental cooperation, more sharing of information, and regional measures, so we can deal more effectively with these issues. Austria therefore looks forward to hearing from our distinguished panel today as to what strategies we should adopt to address the impact of organized crime on the SDGs, and we can surely enhance our understanding of the impact of organized crime on sustainable development, justice, and inclusive institutions. And with that, thank you, and I give back to you, Summer.
Thanks so much, Julia. I think you've really drawn out other areas that are really critical, such as the links between corruption and transnational organized crime. So I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this from our panel today. Now we're going to switch over to our panel. We're going to start with UNDP today. Yaro Acuna Alfaro is the Regional Governance Leader for Latin America and the Caribbean at the UNDP. He was previously the Global Policy Advisor on Core Government Functions and Public Service Excellence at UNDP, and we're very happy to have you today as one of our co-sponsors for the event. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Summer. Let me begin by acknowledging the collaboration between the permanent missions of Colombia, Austria, and Japan to the UN and the University of Peace, and of course, the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime for inviting us to be part of this conversation. Good morning. I am based in Panama, so I'm saying good morning. I understand that some people is also based in Europe and elsewhere in Asia. So good afternoon and good evening. Let me then now share 3 messages from our region. And I think that when we speak about organized crime in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's important to place, the context in which the region is developing. Latin America and the Caribbean and the frequent occurrence of CHOCs in our region is contributing to this trend of heightened risk and insecurity among the population. There are emerging risks that are adding a layer of complexity to a region that was already experiencing, social cohesion fractures within their populations. Weak investments in human development provide incentives to people to seek alternative ways to meet some of their development needs. And unfortunately, they find these opportunities in illegal activities, and organized crime thrives when there are weak institutions and they're absent from certain territories. And let me give you some data that we see emerging from prestigious international research and newspaper organizations. The El País, for instance, estimates that in Mexico, organized crime employs between 160,000 to 180,000 people. Organized crime today is the 5th largest employer in the country. The Economist magazine estimates that in Colombia, armed groups make between $2 and $3 billion per year from illegal gold. This amount is around the same figure as the country's annual legal exports. And in the Caribbean, the economist also estimated last year that almost all weapons and firearms are illegally trafficked, with huge profit margins for traffickers. For example, in 2022, 85% of murders and violent crimes in Jamaica were carried out with an illegal firearm. We need to link this to the burden that it's added to the state budgets, because we know that the cost of gun violence are high for underfunded healthcare systems. For instance, it costs an average of $3,249 to treat a gunshot wound in Jamaica. An annual health spending per person is just $326. And that's the context in which most of the countries in Latin America are dealing with this organized crime and the effects that it has on people's ability to develop. And then, you can add other, phenomenon of organized crime that has to do with women and girls and trafficking in person and the roads. Unfortunately, we don't have as much evidence and data on these other activities. We also know that environmental issues matters, and it matters also, unfortunately, negative when it comes to organized crime. Environmental defenders, particularly indigenous leaders, are targeted by criminal actors, making Latin America and the Caribbean the most dangerous region in the world to advocate for nature, and through its transnational character by undermining the rule of law in protected areas where organized crime threatens climate and biodiversity goals, both on land and sea, as the permanent representative from Japan just alluded. Now, let me move on in terms of, the second message that I want to give in my presentation is that when we talk about SDG 16 and the 2030 agenda, we need to bring to the front the leave no one behind aspiration as well, and with perhaps much more strength in that regard. We must find ways to break the blockade of organized crime and its impact on development. Organized crime doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it has an effect on development opportunities. It's important to anticipate. It's important to strengthen the evidence-based collation. And there are different examples, that we have from Latin America, working together with other donors and counterparts. And last but not least, I think that message number 3 is to change realities. We need to work in an integrated manner on a national, regional, and global scale. I believe one of my previous speakers alluded, to this challenge. The Global Alliance Against Organized Crime has stressed that there's no global strategy against organized crime. There's no strategy in Latin America either, and perhaps, this is something that will need to be addressed as part of the implementation of SDG 16. From a human development perspective, is the central theme of our upcoming Regional Human Development Report. And we want to drive and understand how communities build resilience to organized crime in sustainable and inclusive manner. There are different entry points to have a better understanding which the region can build more resilient societies. And for example, I'm just going to mention 5. First, increase state presence and design more inclusive social protection systems based on human rights. Second, reduce informality with the space for reducing illegal behaviors. Third, it's important to strengthen social cohesion and prevention of violence. Fourth, rethinking how low trust and state fragmentation generate incentives for opting out of the social contract. And fifth, engage with the public, the regional, international, and SDG framework on how to realize the goals. Thank you very much for inviting us for this presentation, and a big shout out to our UNDP colleagues around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to turn to Mark Shaw, who is the director of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Previously, he worked at senior levels in the UNODC and has held various government, civil society, and academic positions focused on public safety and urban violence, particularly in the post-apartheid transition in South Africa. So over to you, Mark. Thanks.
Thank you, Summer, and colleagues. Thank you to Colombia, Japan, and Austria for your very kind co-sponsorship of this event and opening today as HLPF gets underway. And thanks to our other co-sponsors, UNDP and the University of Peace, we are honored to present the event together. Thank you to the panel, and it's especially important, Delphine, to have UNODC as part of the discussion today, and we welcome you as part of the discussion. Today, we're here to discuss progress towards the SDGs, and in particular, SDG 16, which has a specific indicator on organized crime, but it also has many targets that are impacted on by the scourge of illicit markets and organized crime. And I think everybody listening today and the panel and speakers know very well that the manifestations of organized crime are complicated, they're multifaceted, they're widespread, and they are causing devastating harms at different levels, at community level, at regional level, at national level, and so on. And the most obvious harms are manifested in violence, killings, conflicts associated with organized crime and illicit markets. But it is sadly widespread, and it challenges in many cases, and we have seen some very good examples of this recently, the very existence of states and state structures. At the same time, there are other harms which degrade societies over the longer term, including the costs of corruption and money laundering. Julia mentioned that, extortion, lack of investment, unbalanced spending on securitized responses to organized crime at the expense of more strategic investment. And as a result, organized crime is clearly an impediment to achieving most of the SDGs, not just goal 16. And today, I want to focus on 3 areas that are of key importance to the SDG agenda: measuring progress, civil society's role in achieving that progress, and the need for strategic responses. And I'll deal with them one after the other. The first is that we need tools to measure if we are to reach the goals that we have set for ourselves. And the SDGs are all about targets and goals. And until recently, the main metric for analyzing organized crime was seizures, for example, of drugs, but also other commodities. And I think there's general consensus that this is not an accurate way at all of measuring the extent of criminal markets. In May, the Secretary General's report on SDG implementation for 2024 was released, and the report provides a global overview of progress made since 2015 towards the SDGs. Yet in the report, there is no accounting of SDG 16, target 16.4 on arms, IFFs, stolen assets, and combating organized crime. Other studies from the UN, civil society, and academia have found that there's been no progress towards the achievement of SDG 16, and there's a clear lack of evidence as to whether we are making progress at all. The UN's main legal instrument against organized crime, the GI-TOC, has a restricted and delayed review mechanism, which is yet to produce one country report, almost 25 years after its adoption. So again, we have no way of knowing what the impact of the treaty is and how supporting it contributes to the achievement of the SDGs. This data gap, alongside the long-standing challenge of measuring organized crime and associated illicit markets, led us in 2021 to publish the first ever Global Organized Crime Index, with a second edition in 2023. And it analyzes criminal actors and markets in all 193 UN member states. It not only measures criminal markets and actors, but we have also sought to measure resilience to organized crime which we believe is a strong indicator of the progress being made by different member states or not being made, as the case may be. And over the 2 sweeps of the survey, it is clear that criminality is increasing in many parts of the world, and the gap between the criminality scores and the resilience scores is widening in many places. So that's not good news. But as a measurement tool, we feel that the index can help with setting strategic direction for the global community in responding to organized crime. In our own work, the index is a strong marker of where we should focus our priorities, and it's increasingly being used to measure progress in international anti-organized crime and criminal justice programming by different partners around the world. We have 2 more editions planned before 2030, and I hope that you can make use of the data from the index for measuring progress towards the goals and targets related to organized crime. The second point I want to emphasize in my contribution is the role of civil society. Building inclusive societies, as indeed is called for by SDG 16, means engaging civil society actors. And this is especially necessary in building successful efforts to prevent and counter organized crime, to build resilience, as my UNDP colleague said. And no government can do this on their own. Too often, in official meetings at the UN, civil society is excluded or given a token role, and yet civil society actors on the front lines of dealing with the effects of organized crime, and they suffer accordingly. GI-TOC is a network, and we work with local partners on the ground to carry out our research, but we also support our local actors through our Civil Society Resilience Fund. And we are supporting more than 200 projects in more than 60 countries, thanks to the financial support that we receive from the governments of Norway, the United States, the UK, Netherlands, New Zealand, and Germany, as well as others. And we are very grateful for the political support we receive from Austria, who hosts the fund in our office in Vienna, as well as the many governments that support the activities where the fund is active, including Colombia. Through the 5 years of the fund's work, it has confirmed our belief that local communities are essential to making progress against organized crime. At the community level, they are the ones that are providing services that the state is not providing, mediating to end violence, calling for accountability, striving for safer societies, and carrying out the work that is essential, such as providing support to victims, reintegrating children who are leaving gangs, and gathering and providing evidence that can lead to media coverage and to prosecutions. And to give you an example from our work with the Resilience Fund that comes to mind is a new network that we have created against environmental crime in the Congo Basin. And that's led by community activists in 3 different countries who, through the fund, have been able to build a regional movement that highlights corruption, raises awareness of harms, and builds locally led responses. Across Latin America, the fund has supported a wide variety of women and youth-led organizations who are reclaiming public spaces, using art and music to show youth another future away from gangs and violence and criminal groups, and building their skills to search for the bodies of their loved ones who have been kidnapped, disappeared, killed, and to pursue justice in those cases. And we believe strongly that global local partnerships can facilitate this work in ways that have a number of benefits. Local actors bring real local knowledge into high-level policy discussions, and hearing from the most affected people in local, national, and international gatherings helps give an honest assessment of the challenges and the needs of these communities and whether, in fact, we are making progress at all. On the other hand, these connections can bring outside expertise into local communities, can help bring and protect local civil society actors who are under threat from criminal actors, and who build an alternative vision of how their communities can work. So there's a self-reinforcement in both directions between local, regional, and global actors. My third and final point is, again, reflecting my colleague from UNDP, that there's a need for a more strategic approach to deal with organized crime. Over the past 2 years, we have led a series of regional and thematic consultations amongst our membership and a wider set of experts around identifying challenges and good practices to develop a report called Intersections, which highlights the harms caused by organized crime, the shortcomings of current approaches to dealing with the challenge, and sets out a number of priority actions which we believe are critical in providing the building blocks towards a global strategy against organized crime. And you can find that document on our website. It's a document, we hope it's well illustrated, and it provides some insights into what we believe needs to be done. We hope that this effort can stimulate new thinking and new approaches to dealing with organized crime at all levels, both as a security issue, but also as a development, social, and economic issue. To make progress towards SDG 16, again, to emphasize organized crime is a critical area to account for in policy and initiatives. And to make progress, I leave you again the three areas that I've highlighted here. First, an ability to measure progress, where we are making it and where we are lagging. Second, to include the voices of civil society in responses and policy making, to reflect local voices in the global debate. And finally, to be more strategic in our thinking and in our responses. And we hope our intersections report provides some data and ideas and policy suggestions to make that happen. Thank you very much, Summer.
Thanks, Mark. And now I'm going to turn to Delphine Schantz, who is the director of the Office of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime Liaison Office in New York. She represents UNODC at intergovernmental and interagency meetings at UN headquarters. And over to you, Delphine.
Thank you very much, Summer. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much to the Parent Mission of Colombia, Japan, and Austria. And of course, thank you to Mark for his kind words to the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime and our UN colleagues for allowing UNODC to contribute to this event. It really paves the way and launch officially the HLPF with a very important event focusing on key area of UNODC and mandate and work. And maybe actually I'll be focusing a lot on one of the 3 points that Mark highlighted is particularly the ability to assess progress, because as you may know, UNODC, in conjunction with other UN agencies, including UNDP, we're responsible for monitoring progress of 17 of the SDG indicators, with 11 of them, particularly on SDG 16. So there will be an HLPF event on the 17th of July, where UNODC, together with UNDP and OSCHR, it will be at the UNICEF building, will issue the second report on peace, just and strong institutions as a follow-up to the first iteration of this report, which was produced a year ago. So really kind of assessing the progress made towards achieving the objective of SDG 16. So we know, of course, as was highlighted by a previous speaker, that there's been some stagnation and regression in areas such as reduction of violence, access to justice, including governance and peaceful societies, which of course hampering the development. High levels of lethal violence and organized crime continue to contribute to insecurity, leading to reduce the trust in our institutions and in the ability of our institutions to really respond to the need and challenges encountered by a lot of local communities. So let me just take a few of the findings from this report. So civilian casualties in armed conflict increased by 72% between 2022 and 2023. Of course, we know the two main conflicts that have resulted in that triggered these figures, with the highest yearly increase since 2015 for the second consecutive year. 3 of 10 of those victims are children, and 4 in 10 of those victims are women. Organized crime accounted for 22% of global homicide and for 50% on all homicide in Latin America, was illustrated by my colleague from UNDP. Cross-border trafficking in persons is mainly organized, with an increased victims from sub-Saharan Africa detected in a growing number of countries, and we will see this in the upcoming global report on human trafficking, which will be issued in the last quarter of 2024. Women remain most exposed to overall violence, and they're more likely to fall victim for sexual violence and experience lower level of safety overall. But the situation for children was also highlighted by some of the previous speakers, is equally worrisome. Globally, 60% of trafficking victims in 2022 were women and girls, and more than 1 out of 3 detected victims of trafficking are children. And of course, we know that illicit financial flows that emerge from illicit markets fuel corruption, finance organized crime, and potentially some of the links with terrorism. So the data from UNODC, a 2024 World Drug Report, is also illustrated and actually provides some detailed iteration of this pervasive effect of organized crime. Particularly a focus on armed groups in Golden Triangle, which have diversified illegal activities beyond drug production, engaging in online criminality and cyber scamming. There are some special economic zones that have emerged as hotspots for criminal enterprises. Some borders of Latin America was discussed by our colleagues from UNDP have emerged as hubs for drug trafficking groups, expanding in all forms of crime, including trafficking in persons, but also crime that affect the environment with some damage consequences on the ecosystems. So in short, the data demonstrate that the trajectory is very concerning and that scaling up of the action on SDG 16 through a cross-dimensional approach is very much needed in every sector, and how particularly identifying how criminals seeks to really profit in every sectors. So the multilateral solution and international cooperation are fundamental. The partnership between all the custodians of Goal 16 indicators is therefore critical to promote the progress and keep improving data facilitation by states. So to this end, in addition to the Global Progress Report through the SDG 16 survey initiatives, UNODC, UNDP, and OSCHR have been providing some tools for the member states to be able to actually promote the data collection on SDG 16 indicators and providing the capacity development and training to how to measure those SDG 16s. So, of course, when we work on measuring SDG 16 progress, there was almost, as Mark was mentioning, no data available for the SDG 16 indicators. Now, halfway to the 2030 agenda, the UN has helped member states to better understand some of the, and to how to assess some of the pervasive hidden challenges, such as illicit financial flows, trafficking in persons, or violence, and to better target those areas that really require technical assistance and improvement. So as a result, the data availability has nearly doubled. I mean, of course, it's still quite, compared to other SDG, quite unfortunately minimal, because we've gone from 22% to now nearly 42% of the last assessment of data availability. And if you want to know a bit more granular on some of the data related to criminal justice, drugs, and crime, which are related to UNODC, for which UNODC is a custodian, you can actually go to the UNODC data portal, where you'll find all this information provided by member states. We've also developed the statistical framework to measure corruption, which can provide guidance to government to develop the national information systems, to better able to detect the presence and measure the magnitudes and monitor the trends of different forms of corruption. And this is really good when you actually go for a diagnostic of the where are the areas of potential vulnerability where organized crime can potentially grow. Next week, on Wednesday, we will mark the UN World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, which is actually later in the month, with a dedicated HLPF event to focus on accelerating action on SDG 16.2 to leave no child behind in the fight against human trafficking. So this comes ahead of the release of the report which I mentioned on the global report on trafficking at the last quarter of this year. But important also to see that UNODC, together with IOM, which co-chair the ICAT on human trafficking, will present the international classification standard for administrative data on trafficking in persons next year, which will provide a common reference and guidance for the collection, management, and reporting of data related to human trafficking. So, of course, moving forward, organized crime and its urgent threat really requires a long-term sustainable response intervention that was mentioned by some of the previous speakers. Building better responses to organized crime requires proactive policy responses that place an emphasis on the prevention and on the diagnosis based on very a whole of society approach. And I fully concur with a lot of points that Mark made about the involvement of civil society, but also better data. so that we can really provide this sufficient assistance to the institutions and prevent economies from being infiltrated, and ultimately challenge the state authority, as we've seen in a lot of parts in Latin America. UNODC is redoubling its effort to assist member states in developing comprehensive gender and human rights sensitive strategies to combat organized crime. Of course, acting as secretariat for the UNTOC, but well aware of its limitations as well, and providing a lot of technical assistance, emphasizing with a whole menu of services, from the diagnostic on corruption, on management of prisons, on human trafficking, depending, of course, on the specific needs of the countries. During the SDG 16 conference and SDG 16 expert group meeting, which was held in May and co-organized with UNDP and DESA, we've heard a lot of experts providing information, like data, on how to really improve the collection of data on SDG 16, and also providing a potential response. And the participants have really called for a strengthened conflict prevention, a focus again on prevention, and hence the efforts aiming at tackling the violence and step up the fight against corruption and organized crime. And we've heard the hopes that the HLPF and the Summit of the Future will actually take these elements into consideration. And we're very pleased to see that, at least one of the action in the current draft of the Pact of the Future does include a focus on organized crime. It is clear that a focus on prevention and mitigation of transnational organized crime can positively impact the ability of member states to meet the targets of the 2030 agenda. So in conclusion, really strengthening international cooperation and reinforcing legal frameworks are also paramount, especially in dealing with challenges such as firearms trafficking, cybercrime, and hopefully we will have an instrument early August specifically dealing with cybercrime, and also the link, the interactions that was also mentioned before between terrorism and crime. And of course, in all this, UNODC remains committed to assist you in doing all this, and in close partnership with all our UN colleagues and with the Global Initiative. Thanks again for having us today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Delphine, and thanks for telling us about the upcoming side events as well. That's great to know. I'm now going to turn to Mauricio. We have 2 more speakers today, so I hope people can stay with us. Mauricio is the chair on countering illicit trade and preventing transnational organized crime at the University for Peace. And over to you, Mauricio.
Thank you. Thank you, Summer. Can you hear me well? Okay. So since I'm based in Costa Rica, I would say good morning to everyone, but also good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. I also would like to thank you to the representatives of the permanent missions of Colombia, Austria, and Japan for their remarks, and to GI-TOC and UNDP for leading the organization of this panel. On SDG 16.1, that is centered on violence reduction, organized crime, and peaceful societies, I would like to start bringing some findings in a document University for Peace recently launched, that is the white paper on illicit economies and organized crime in Africa. Although it was centered on this continent, some aspects can be understood as global overview and challenges for comprehending what violence and peace we refer to. So first, it is important to understand that illicit economies and organized crime undermine efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Practices derived from illicit economies and organized crime are embedded in cyclical violence, regardless of either the perpetrators or state or non-state actors. State actors are the dominant agents who facilitate illicit economies and inhibit resilience to organized crime, and their illicit practices pose direct and indirect harm to the economies globally, as they have exacerbated societal tensions and incited violence, which also includes ethnic and intergenerational conflicts in some parts of the world. Moreover, socioeconomic vulnerabilities are aggravated by the exploitation of natural resources by transnational organized criminal groups, and these organizations' impact on the environment is reflected through the level of degradation present, which has negatively affected the levels of poverty, malnutrition, and food security. Second, this scenario evidences some gaps that impede societies to end the cycle of violence in which low levels of human development trigger the incidence of criminal actors and organizations. Conflict zones are brought about by social cleavages, so the lack of territorial presence by the state contributes to this dynamic, impacting accessibility to social and economic services and infrastructure. This void generated by the state leaves space for other actors, such as organized criminal groups, to take advantage of ungoverned and illegitimate territories throughout the continent, which allows illicit economies and organized crime to flourish. High levels of youth unemployment and the lack of quality education also contribute to the creation of social cleavages and conflict. Countries suffering from armed conflict tend to experience breakdowns in their post-conflict peace-building processes due to a lack of policies that protect and empower children who are victims of forced recruitment into armed forces. In this regard, a solution-oriented approach to this scenario should not only be reactive, but also preventive. At this point, the University for Peace found that there is a need for consumer-centered approaches that must be the focus for diminishing the pervasiveness of illicit goods, contraband, and counterfeit products. In some countries, consumer protection is not a well-known concept, since consumers cannot differentiate between original and counterfeit goods, mainly because low prices of goods function as drivers for consumption. The lack of education and awareness on consumer rights needs to be addressed by the government actors, civil society members, and representatives of the private sector and non-governmental organizations. Taking the opportunity on Mark Sean's presentation on the global strategy against organized crime intersections, I would like to state that University for Peace officially supports the intersection strategy, and based on its content, I would like to emphasize that it's assertive in bringing the correlation between peace, conflict, political instability, and organized crime. So on this, I would like just to conclude that the University for Peace support three main areas that are crucial for violence reduction and the promotion of peace. The first one is the capacity building for social rehabilitation, which is centered on soft skills of those that will work directly with men and women that will initiate their social rehabilitation process aiming to influence the end of the cycle of violence. Capacity building for monitoring and promotion of free elections, which is centered on providing the tools to civil society on how to map out the influence of criminal groups in democratic elections, and capacity building for the protection of journalists. It is known that journalists are frequently a target when reporting corruption and other criminal cases. So in this sense, the University for Peace believes that information is crucial for transparency and anti-corruption practices, and journalists must be protected as part of their duties. Thank you very much, Summer.
Thanks so much, Mauricio. I see some very interesting common threads coming across. Our final panelist is Bindu Sharma, and I hope everybody can please stay and listen, because Bindu is really going to draw attention to part of SDG 16 that I don't think gets a lot of attention often, and was referenced by multiple panelists today, including Delphine and Mauricio, which is children and the protection of children. So Bindu is the Vice President of Global Policy and Industry Alliances and the Managing Director of the Asia Pacific at the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And over to you, Bindu.
Thank you, Summer. I am just going to do a screen share before I start, and I hope that works. Great. Is that visible? Great. Thank you, Summer. Good day to everyone, wherever you are, excellencies, friends, and colleagues. A privilege to be part of this panel today and to highlight the importance of a robust legislative framework that are necessary but not sufficient response to child protection. In addition to enforcement and implementation, cross-sector collaborative action and innovative responses are key to end the SDG goal 16.2, to end abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against and torture of children. Thank you to Mark and the GI-TOC team for this opportunity to be part of this panel today. I'll start with a quick introduction to the International Center. We're a global organization headquartered in Alexandria, Virginia, with a footprint in several countries. It should go without saying that every child deserves a safe childhood. However, for far too many children, this isn't their reality. As we endeavor to make the world safer for children, our three key areas of focus are research-based advocacy, cross-sector collaborative action, and national capacity building through training. And I'll touch on the first two. And very much laser-focused on a niche issue of online child exploitation. Why OSEC? It's often considered under the human trafficking umbrella, but it is in fact uniquely different. OSEC is evolving crime. What you see on my screen is not an exhaustive list. Each day, offenders are finding new ways of sexually exploiting children with the use of the internet. When we first started about 2 decades ago, we were only dealing with child sexual abuse and exploitative material. But today, there is, as you see, a long list of offenses. I highlight the latest challenge that we see called sextortion, where children are approached, enticed, groomed, and coerced, first to produce sexually exploitative material, and then the same material is often used to blackmail the victim into producing more extreme content, or pay the offender in order to stop the explicit material from being distributed publicly on social media. In 2023 alone, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, our sister organization that runs a hotline, received 26,700 reports of financial sextortion, up from just 10,000 in 2022. And more so now, with generative AI, has added a completely new dimension and poses new and unique threats and risks to children. To put the global reality into context, in 1995, less than 1% of the world's population were active internet users. Today, this figure has grown to 67%, that is 5.5 billion internet users. The ubiquity of the internet hence behooves us to focus on online child sexual exploitation. And as earlier speakers have said, we are lagging behind in the SDG 16 goals, and certainly in 16.2. In 2019, UNICEF study estimated that children and adolescents under 18 account for 1/3 of internet users around the world. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that I just mentioned, that runs a global hotline to report online child exploitation and abuse, received 36.2 million reports of suspected child abuse, exploitation, grooming, solicitation in just 1 year, 2023, as against 17 million in 2019, a doubling, more than double in 5 years. Children continue to be at risk as they spend more and more time online for school, for entertainment, and to connect socially. And technology, advances like Gen AI and end-to-end encryption, compound the threats and risks to children. A child's increased presence online is putting him or her at a higher risk of being approached, targeted by, and or engaging with online predators through social networking, image or video sharing apps, instant messaging, or even gaming platforms. And as you can see, the statistics here, I'm not going to read in the interest of time. Statistics really do leave our heads spinning. A necessary first step, as I said, for nation states is to have a robust child protection legal framework. To that effect, way back in 2006, the International Center began to review global legislative frameworks. We released the first child sexual exploitation abuse material model legislation and global review in 2006, which at that time focused on the 184 Interpol member countries starting with the 6th edition, we expanded to review all UN member states. We review the legislation of each country through a lens of 5 core criteria listed here. Does national legislation exist with specific regard to this issue? Is this issue defined? Are technology-facilitated offenses criminalized? Is simple possession of CSAM criminalized? Are ISPs mandated to report suspected child exploitation on their platforms? Out of 196 countries that we reviewed, 156 countries have introduced new legislation or improved existing legislation on child sexual abuse material since the first edition was published in 2006. However, today there are only 27 countries that have sufficient legislation that meet all 5 criteria. In 2006, only 5 countries met the 5 criteria. 111 countries meet at least 4 of the criteria which we consider to be sufficient. And in 2006, that number stood at 22. In 2006, what was mind-boggling to us was 95 countries had no legislation in place. Today, however, there are still 10 countries that do not, 16 countries that do not have legislation in place. So the need for a robust, if there is no definition of a crime or there is no legal framework around the crime, then there is no crime and children are left at risk. In terms of collaborative action, ICMEC's Financial Coalition Against Child Sexual Exploitation is an innovative partnership with the financial payments industry. We believe the financial industry has a role to play in combating this crime. The detect, report, disrupt approach by following the money to disrupt the economics of this trade. More importantly, it's also one way to disrupt the demand side of this equation. Tackling the demand side preempts and prevents the abuse from happening in the first place. We're all aware that currently governments and civil society puts all their effort into rescuing children from harm or providing care and rehab services after the fact. Launched in the US in 2006, with expanded efforts in the APAC region in 2009, the Financial Coalition is a powerful alliance with the financial payments industry and some technology partners too, with one goal, as said earlier, to disrupt the economics of the trade. ICMEC, as a convener, facilitator, and catalyst, provides the platform for engagement, sharing of knowledge and insights, and cross-sector collaborative action and due diligence across industry, law enforcement, regulatory bodies, and industry associations. It is very much a voluntary coalition of the willing, where we all acknowledge that law enforcement cannot prosecute its way out of this crime. Emerging responses we see by the financial industry is FIs are certainly working harder to better understand the crime and the human impact thereof. Many are mainstreaming financial investigations on online exploitation on par with fraud and money laundering. All this requires a high level of commitment from leadership. First, to build the capacity in-house, and then to develop new and innovative approaches to detect, report, and disrupt. Financial industry is developing solutions using data analytics, forensic accounting, cross-sector partnerships, and more. A handful of regulators have also directed their attention to this crime type, publishing indicators, typologies, and offender profiles that provide greater insights, not only to industry in the detection of this crime in their systems, but also to law enforcement and other regulators alike globally. On online child exploitation, the whole issue faces a shifting landscape, which is the reality today, I think, in all crimes. There's a steady emergence of new payment platforms and the complexity thereof. Digital currencies add to the complexity. Social media and apps are unwittingly hosting this activity. End-to-end encryption is further adding to law enforcement challenges and provides impunity to offenders. And then, of course, we have the whole realm of the dark web and the challenges thereof. And not to mention, which I say again, the challenges posed by generative AI. So we do indeed, as one of the other speakers said, a long way to go in child protection. But these are some small steps that we're taking to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bindu. I think that really drills down to one particular area and topic and shows just how complex that one little area is. So I think that's a really good way to end this panel. I think we've heard from speakers about just how pervasive the issue is. I think our colleagues in Latin America have really drawn out how transnational organized crime employs people. It has commodities. I mean, it's really a force that has to be considered in the development space and tackled with development responses in these ways. We've heard from Delphine and from Mark about ways that we're going about trying to measure the issues and trying to use that data to build better responses, which is critical. And it's happening across the UN system in partnership, and that's really terrific to hear. And we really appreciate the support and the efforts by the member states, Austria, Colombia, and Japan, who have come today to really put support behind this issue. So thank you to everyone. I'm sorry we don't have time today to get into the Q&A. I thank everybody for staying a little extra, and I'm sure everyone has many HLPF events to now jump to. So thank you so much, and we will see you this week.